morning, everyone. If I could have all of our students please find a seat. This is going to be streamed live, and we like to start it as close to on time as we can. So if all of our students could please find a seat. There are some seats at the very back below the letter C. Those were reserved for school board or central office staff, and I think most of them have arrived. So you can please fill up that area, and we'll begin very shortly. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, Tara. Should we tell people who we are?
Sure. I'm Bailey Chisholm, and I am the co-president of the CEC Student Council.
And I'm Tara Cashin. I'm the other co-president of CEC Student Council. Welcome to Stand Up Speak Out 2017. It's awesome to have this many people here.
Hey.
Hi. What's your story?
I'm Mr. Bill Callback, and I'm the principal here at CEC.
Yeah, well, actually, I knew that. But we have some grade 9 students here today that might not have known that.
True. Thanks, Tara. Yeah, I'd like to take a minute and welcome. We have students here from Bible Hill Junior High, Central Colchester Junior High, and West Colchester Consolidated, along with their teachers. I'd really like to welcome them here, as well as all of our own grade 10 students and staff that have joined us.
Thank you, Mr. Callback. Woo! We also have some guests from Central Office here today.
That's right, Bailey. Thank you. Welcome to all the staff from Central Office who have stopped over for this event. And just a couple of quick reminders before we begin. If you are wearing your hat, could you please remove it while you're in our AV room? And please, let's be respectful to all of our guests and our presenters here at CEC today.
Hello. What's your story?
Well, my name's Trudy Thompson, and I'm chairperson of Chignecto-Central Regional School Board. And
Neat. Wait, what does that mean again?
well, each part of our region elects a representative to the board to have community voice, and I speak on behalf of that group of people.
Great. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. This is the 5th year for Stand Up, Speak Out, and this annual event is a reminder that CCRSB believes in the importance of inclusion, respect, and understanding in the field of learning. Many of my fellow board members are being welcomed in schools across this region today, and we are very excited about this year's launch. And we're very proud of how it has evolved over the years. We are looking forward to hearing the many stories that will be shared throughout the year.
Hey, did anyone notice the doors around town lately? I heard there's one in Victoria Park, and there's one downtown by the Trove Farmers Market.
I noticed that too. I also heard that there were doors in Amherst, Elmsdale, and New Glasgow. And these doors behind us look pretty familiar.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
So, what's your story?
My name's Gary Adams. I'm the superintendent of schools and the CEO of CCRSB.
Superintendent. What does that mean?
So the superintendent is responsible for making sure that the entire system, all of our schools and all of our offices, are supporting the education of each student. I'm the only employee of the governing board, but I certainly don't do that all alone. I have an amazing team that helps me manage the work.
So you're like the boss of all the schools, is that right?
Yeah, sort of.
We are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Stand Up, Speak Out is a very important event. This helps us to say how much we believe that students have a right to feel safe in school and be treated with kindness and respect. And it's also a great opportunity to remind us that we're all human, we all have a story, and we all want to be treated with kindness.
I totally agree. So what's the story with the doors?
Aren't these doors great? This was an idea that we had to keep the conversation of Stand Up, Speak Out going throughout the year, and also to involve the broader community. So each of the doors represents one of the pillars of our social justice framework.
Wait, can you remind me of what that is?
Sure. So there are 5 pillars in the social justice framework. Each of the doors represents one of the pillars: gender, race, sexual orientation, class, and abilities. We all have these identities, and they help make up who we are.
Cool.
Right. And so the idea this year is that the doors will travel around to each of the schools. Students will have an opportunity to decorate the doors and have conversations about the social justice pillars.
I really like that idea, Gary. So a school such as CEC might ask to have the door that represents, say, race, brought to CEC, and then we could invite a speaker, maybe do a student focus group or other activities, and talk about race a little deeper. We can decorate the door and with our stories about race. Great idea.
Exactly. And the theme this year is What's Your Story? So what's behind each of the doors? It's through the stories about each other that we get to know each other better. And as we understand each other, we get to respect and not judge and criticize.
That's awesome. I know that's true for me. I find the more I know someone's story, the less likely I am to be mean or say mean things about them.
Exactly. So once again, I want to thank everybody for being here today or being included through the broadcast. And I encourage all of our students and staff to continue to look for opportunities to have these conversations throughout the year so that we can look for many, many ways to show respect and value for the perspectives and contributions of everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Adams, Ms. Thompson, and Mr. Callback. Thank you all for your support.
Yes, thank you so much. Now we are going to get the stage ready for the next part of today. And while we do that, we will have a song by Rhea May, All These Thoughts on Fire. Rhea May was unable to join us today, but she wanted us to know that she is in full support of today's event, and she gave us permission to use her song.
All these thoughts on fire, fire. All these thoughts on fire, fire. It would tear me apart to think that you were lying. All these thoughts on fire. Ooh. I didn't listen to your negative reasons. I don't got time for that sort of thinking. I'm unaware if you're trying to bring me down. Too busy thinking better thoughts, and I love that so much. I believe I can do it if I want. I believe I can do it if I want. I believe that everyone's with me. All these thoughts on fire, fire. All these thoughts on fire, fire. It would tear me apart. They're a liar, liar. All these thoughts on fire. Ooh. Now hold your head up high and listen, listen. Know when is good advice, but don't care what they're thinking. And I'll race you to the finish line. I was your favorite underdog. I'm gonna miss that so much. I believe I can do it if I want. I believe I can do it if I want. I believe that everyone's with me. All these thoughts on fire, fire. All these thoughts on fire, fire. If they tell you you can't, they're a liar, liar. All these thoughts on fire. All these thoughts on fire, fire. All these thoughts on fire, fire. If they tell you you can't, they're a liar, liar. All these thoughts on fire. Ooh.
That was Claire Hartland and Claire Boudreau on vocals. Great job, guys. I love this door concept.
Me too. I think it'll be fun to see the doors at the end of the school year with everyone's art contributions put on them.
Yeah, and I heard they will all come back together and create a CCRSB standing art piece. Isn't that awesome?
Talking about art, you may have noticed that we have some live art being created here today. Over the next 45 minutes, CEC students Serena Del Mastro, Marina Lockhart, Anna Fullerton, Riley Collier, and Lincoln Bradford will create art on this blank door. This art will be an expression of the social justice pillars: race, gender, sexual orientation, class, and abilities.
So here's what's going to happen. In a moment, I'm going to invite Glenn Thompson to the stage, and Glenn will show us a number of videos that relate to the pillars.
Great. Glenn, are you ready?
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Bailey. The next part of our event is a series of videos and a couple of speeches. When we started to plan for this, we all agreed that we wanted to do three things. The first was to continue the message of stand up, speak out throughout the whole school year and not let it be a one-day event. Second, we wanted to deepen our conversations about bullying, and we thought one way to do that was to ground our discussions in the social justice pillars. Often, when people are unkind, we attack these parts of each other, or we use language that is hurtful to one of the communities within these pillars. Third, we wanted to broaden the discussion to the larger community. We want to get our communities to discuss and think about why we treat each other badly. This should not just be a school issue. So, we reached out to our community, and we would like to now share some of their stories with you. The first video was submitted by Corey Bowles. You probably know him best through his work with Trailer Park Boys, but his video will introduce the other aspects of who he is. Corey's video will share his story as it relates to the race pillar.
Hey everybody, how you doing? My name is Corey Bowles. I'm a writer, director, choreographer, actor. Most people know me from Trailer Park Boys, among other things. I'm from Truro, of course. I'm a Black Nova Scotian. I think I just said that. Maybe I didn't. But if I didn't, then I am. I was asked to be there, and I can't. I really wish I could. But I'm in Toronto right now for the premiere of my new movie, Black Cop, which is premiering in just a few hours from now. So this is the moment before I go to a sold-out theater and watch a movie that's in response to police violence and just a different perspective. And it was a real risky movie for me, but it was a passion project as well. So I'm really glad I did it. I was asked to talk about a couple things. I'm really excited and interested that you're all talking about the things you are. That's what I do. Most of my work involves social structures and racial identity and other identity, things like that. I'll be working on a piece that involves music and the immigrant experience next. And So I was asked in this, when doing this message about any experiences I had growing up, and there's a ton, there's a ton of experiences being black and being minority, whether it was in education. I was a kid that in high school I ran symposiums, and I sometimes would speak in conferences with the teachers and whatnot about education and law enforcement as well. I was really active on those things. At the time, it was seen kind of different. And then I stopped for a while. I mostly just lived my life in the arts, and then it came back around within my art, which is where I found my voice. I think one time I was a skateboarder. I used to skateboard when I was young. When I was probably about 15, maybe 14. I grew up with a lot of racism because I grew up in a community that was not the best. It wasn't an upper class community, so you tend to get along a little better there. You kind of feel all the same. But I remember sitting down one day and having a slushie from Green Gables, and a police car came up to me, and they just started questioning me, which is fine. Police always question me, but before they started questioning me, they started asking me why I was throwing rocks at cars, which I was kind of like, I wasn't doing that at all. And then they told me I was, actually. I was like, no, I'm not. And we kind of got into it until they got out and really intimidated me. They told me why. They said that I was wearing a red hat and that someone with a red hat was throwing rocks. And that's when I kind of knew, right away I knew that it was someone who either had dark skin or, in this case it turned out they were looking for a young Aboriginal-looking person. So, so it was actually, I was profiled for being Aboriginal. It wasn't, but that was a moment when I realized that, after they left, it was about 20 minutes or so. They were really quizzing me on what I did and why I was around. And I told them, what I like to do and things like that. And they, they were like, they asked, they tried to be all small talk and asked me about some stuff, about what I wanted to do. I told them lots of things I wanted to do when I grew up. Most of the time they laughed. And I realized that they were looking at me at that point as trouble. I hadn't really done too much then. I was just kind of minding my business. And I had a friend with me too who they basically didn't even listen to. They thought that person was covering for me. And that was a moment I knew that things were going to be a little different for me as I got older. And I knew that I would have to sort of contend with a lot of things. And I have. And, not as much as some people. I started understanding, I started being a little more empathetic and kind of looking around at those things and how it affects us. Growing up, I thought it was just normal. My house used to get windows soaped. Sometimes they would soap niggers go home, things like that. And my mom was pretty hard. She was tough, so I didn't bother me. Once I started feeling it myself, I knew that, I knew it'd be a part of my work. I knew it'd be a part of my life. And, you can rise above that. And a lot of times people are like, ignore this or ignore that. But I don't believe in ignoring it. To me, that's the same way as being in a window and seeing an assault and closing the window. I take it head on. I face it full on, and it's never beat me. It never will, and I hope it doesn't for anyone else. I hope that we listen to each other, and that's what I try to do. I try to listen, and I fight for people to be listened to. I feel that my way is by art and challenging and asking questions, but it's been pretty good for me so far. So, the fight is always going on, and that's the fight for me. The fight is to be better humans, and sometimes we're in a bad position because we're looked at as not good humans, simply because people can be afraid of us for being different, or they can decide we're something. And there's a big conundrum that goes with that, a lot of anger you have to stifle when people, they want something from your culture, or your identity, but then they want to silence you. And that just doesn't happen with me being black. It happens to our Aboriginal community, it happens to women, it happens to immigrants, it happens to foreigners. I don't like even the word foreigners. Even me saying that was kind of like, it feels bad, But yeah, and those are the little times that I'm glad I'm constantly learning. So, much love to all of you. I wish I was there to talk more. Hopefully I'll see you all when I bring my movie to Truro in October. And we'll see you soon. Much love.
Great. Thanks, Corey. All right. Next, our next video was submitted by Zeth LeBlanc. Zeth's story speaks to the gender pillar. He is from Nova Scotia, and his message is very much one of hope and the need to educate through our stories.
Hey everyone, I'm Seth LeBlanc, and I'm one of the people representing the gender aspect of the 5 pillars of social justice. I myself identify as a transgender male, and that means that I was assigned female at birth but identify as male. I've been out and transitioning publicly for the past 2 years, and I'm also an advocate for the transgender community. So identifying and living publicly as a trans guy and also advocating for the transgender community, I've been pretty public. So I've experienced some transphobia and some pretty negative situations that involved my gender identity. Fortunately, I haven't experienced anything to an extreme, but I've been told some pretty inappropriate things, like I've been told to go kill myself, and I've had situations where I felt like my safety was at risk and crazy things like that. I mean, I could go down a list of the different situations and scenarios that happen, but I don't think about them really, and honestly I don't even keep a list because hate is stemmed by a lack of knowledge. And with all the work that so many of us are doing to this day, we're combating that hate. And there's so many people out there that are willing to be educated on diversity in general. It's just some of us don't have the opportunity to experience this diversity in our lives. We're not born with the knowledge of what transgender means. We're not born with the knowledge of all of these things. So it's only natural that we be taught at some point in our lives. There's no shame in that. And with that being said, hate is something that is taught to us. None of us are born a racist. We're not born homophobic or transphobic. We're taught these things. And I believe that if hate is something that can be taught, then acceptance is something that can be taught as well. And I think the reason why some people are not willing to be educated is because hate stems from fear, and fear stems from a lack of knowledge. And some people are so afraid of learning that what they've known all their lives is actually incorrect. But a lot of these people do come around. A lot of people are willing to be educated, and some people just take a little bit more time than others. And with all the work that so many of us have been doing in this world to try and spread that awareness and knowledge, to try and combat that discrimination and that hate, we're working towards creating and developing a much more safe and comfortable environment for so many people out there. So I'd much rather focus on how much progress we've been making in the past, present, and will continue to make in the future, instead of keep list of all the negative things that have been happening in regards to my gender identity. The transphobia and these negative situations that do happen, they're still very much important. They happen every day. And I mean, even if you disagree with how people live their lives and how people identify, like if you disagree with the fact that trans people were born this way and that it's not something that we just one day decided we want to do, even if you disagree with diversity, don't you agree that there's already so much hardship and hate in this world, and that love is honestly just such a better solution for everybody?
Great, thanks, Seth. Next, I will ask Stephanie Eisner-Ryan to come to the stage. Stephanie is the Director of Programs and Student Services for our school board, and her story relates to the sexual orientation pillar.
Well, good morning. I'm Stephanie Eisner-Ryan, and as Glenn said, I'm Director of Programs and Student Services in Chignecto-Central Regional School Board. First of all, you're probably wondering who I am and what I do anyway. So let me give you a little bit of an explanation. I'm a teacher, but I work at central office, not in a school. I was a teacher in a few different schools for quite a few years. Then I was a principal in a few schools, then a consultant and a coordinator, and now my title is director. My job as Director of Programs and Student Services is focused on what students are learning in their classrooms and how we can best support them to be successful. So, what's my story anyway? That's probably the other thing you're wondering. What's she got to say that has anything to do about the social justice pillars, and in particular the sexual orientation pillar? Well, my story has taken some interesting and sometimes complicated twists and turns, just like anyone else's has. In reflecting on what I might say today, I came to the conclusion that my story about the significant relationships in my life is kind of made up of 3 different phases with a couple of subsections, so far anyway. So, phase 1, high school years. My high school years were fairly typical. I dated a few guys, and by grade 11, I had a steady boyfriend that I spent lots of time with. When I left to go away to teachers' college, I was pretty sure that this was the guy I was going to end up marrying in a few years' time. Little did I know that phase 2 of my life of relationships was about to begin. Phase 2, college and university years. Well, it wasn't long before I met this really interesting girl at teachers' college, and we really seemed to connect right away. She had a great sense of humor and was really fun to be around. I became less and less interested in going home to see my boyfriend. Eventually, after a couple of months, I ended my relationship with him, saying that I just didn't want to be tied to home and I wanted to focus on my new college life. So for the next 3 or 4 years, I really felt like I was involved in a tug of war within myself. I was drawn to this person, but I didn't want to be because I shouldn't be. Remember, this is over 30 years ago, so it really wasn't all that okay for this type of a close relationship to be forming. Eventually, I decided I would give in to these feelings and go with it, since I think I was pretty much in love with her almost from the very beginning. After all, if it didn't work out, I could always just end it and move on. When I reflect on my life at this time, I always say I fell in love with her because of the person she is, not because she was a woman. Phase 3, Part A, was about to begin. So phase 3, I call working years, Part A. So I started teaching right out of university, and my relationship with my partner continued to develop, and we became very close. We decided we should live together. However, as far as anyone knew, we were friends and roommates. That's how we talked about each other. But we did spend pretty much all of our time together, and we attended each other's family functions. At one point, after we had exhausted apartment life, we both bought our own separate houses, but we spent our weekends together. These were the years I felt like I was living a double life, a public life, which was very different from my private life. And I have to say, I'm really not that great at keeping secrets, so it wasn't really all that easy. Having to be so careful with what I said in the staff room at work and other places so as not to let out my secret. I've always been a pretty confident and determined woman, and the years were passing, and I decided I didn't want to spend my life without being a parent, and my partner was in agreement. So it was time to have a baby. But still, we didn't outwardly say that we were a couple and that we'd be having this child together. I do realize that probably most of the people around us knew what was going on. It just wasn't something you talked about. That was 18 years ago. I do have to say that everyone around me was so excited for me when I was expecting and I was going to become a mom. I had nothing but support from everyone. So when our little girl was about 6 years old or so, we decided that it would be wise for us to make things legal from a parent's point of view, so that my partner was a legal parent also. Our lawyer told us the best route would be to get married and plan an adoption. So that's what we did 12 years ago this September. That was just right around the time that it became legal in Nova Scotia for same-sex couples to get married. Well, having a wedding is kind of a public event, So this is when we actually officially started coming out to our family and friends. And not surprisingly, most of them just said, yeah, I knew. So moving on to phase 3, part B, working years and married life. Well, I have to say that life has been pretty positive since then. Such a weight had been lifted. It's liberating to be able to open up and be truthful. My partner and I have raised our daughter, who just happened to graduate from CEC last year. We feel very accepted in our community, at work, and at school. I can't say that I've really experienced an uncomfortable or negative situation because of the person I am and the relationship I have with my partner, or being a family with 2 moms. I've had a very successful career, and I have not experienced any barriers with regard to progressing and moving forward to different levels of accomplishment. Just one little anecdote, the only sort of negative one I can think of. When our daughter was in elementary school, she was teased one time by one of her classmates who said, "You have 2 moms." And her response to the other child was, "So?" Her teacher called me that evening to make sure that she was okay and to let me know she was looking after things with the other child. So our daughter is off to university, and she's doing great. We're at home still living out phase 3, part B, working years, married life, and we're really enjoying life. We're looking forward to the next phase, which I'll probably call phase 4, retired years, married life. Like I said earlier, I fell in love with my partner because of who she is, not because she's a woman. If anything ever happened and I found myself no longer in this relationship, heaven forbid, I really can't say what the next phase in my life might bring. Would the next love in my life be a woman or a man? I think it's really all about who makes you feel great about the person you are. I hope you all can find that special someone who makes you feel great. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next, we have a video by Lindsay Hilton. Lindsay's video will share her story as it relates to the abilities pillar. We will first watch a short video of Lindsay at her CrossFit gym, and then we will switch videos and hear from Lindsay herself. Lindsay's story is all about setting challenges and taking risks and not being afraid.
It's not weird that I go to the gym. Like, that's what I'm trying to do, is show people, like, this is normal.
My name is Lindsay Hilton. I was born missing all 4 limbs. Because of this, I've had to adapt, take risks, and most importantly, try. Growing up, I was an active kid. I always wanted to do everything everyone else was doing. I never wanted what I looked like to impact how I was able to live my life. Because of this, I've always tried to say yes to new opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities may have seemed unlikely for me, things like playing rugby or participating in CrossFit. When I first started playing rugby, I really wasn't sure if it was going to be something that I could do. Would I be able to keep up with the other players? Would the coaches want me on their teams? But I went into it with an attitude of, I'm going to try it and see what happens. Luckily for me, my coaches have all had really open minds and have helped me become a player just like everyone else. I've been playing rugby for over 15 years, and people still ask me, how do you play rugby and how do you do it? And my answer is always just like everyone else, although I'm sure it looks a little bit different. When I started doing CrossFit a few years ago, I had the same sort of thoughts. Would I be able to perform the movements? Would the coaches want me there? Would I hold up the rest of the class? But again, I went into it with an attitude of, let's just try this and see what happens. And I'm certainly not an expert, and I still have a lot to improve on, but I am successfully performing a lot of movements, succeeding in workouts, and again, I have awesome coaches helping me along the way. Taking a chance on both of those things has changed my life, opened up so many opportunities, and boosted my confidence. So I challenge you all to try something new this week. It doesn't have to be huge. It can be trying a new food, saying yes when somebody asks you to go to a yoga class or an art class. Whatever it is, take a chance and just try.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, sure. Next, we have Mariah Carney with us. Mariah's video connects to the class pillar. So we're going to show the video first, and then Mariah's going to come up and speak to it.
Having a place to call home is not a privilege, it's a basic human necessity. Over 30,000 Canadians each night are homeless without a place to stay. At My Home Apparel, we're working hard to provide every Canadian with a home. 5% of all profits from every product that we sell is donated back to homelessness initiatives in Canada. We try to keep as much of the industry as we can here with all the designing and printing done in Canada. So why homelessness? Because I believe that the homeless are so often forgotten. They're so often misunderstood and so often feared, yet they all have a story. We're all human beings longing for connection, relationships, love, and support. Having a place to call home gives someone encouragement. It gives them hope. It motivates them to get clean, get their feet on the ground, and start a new life for themselves. And at My Home Apparel, we want to help provide that hope and be a part of that movement. People can show where they're proud to call home while also making a difference to help end homelessness in Canada.
Thanks for having me. So that video is 2 years old, and I'm proud to announce we have donated over $22,000 in the last 2 years from all of your support and believing in our brand, which is from right here in Truro. One of the reasons that I got involved with homelessness, which I said on the video, is that I do believe there's not a person you wouldn't love if you could hear their story. Homelessness is not a choice. It's often an outcome from tragedy, being born into a cycle of poverty. And for the 7,000 youth who are homeless in Canada right now, it's often because they themselves grew up in a family living in the shelter, who faced parents who lost a job, parents who maybe went through a very difficult divorce, didn't have family support, identify as LGBT youth, and their families alienated them. But all of them who are living in shelters today or trying to get themselves out, it's not a choice for them. So when you going through Truro, which we do have a homeless population here, or you visit Halifax or Toronto or Vancouver where there's a large homeless population, next time when you see somebody who's struggling, you'll understand that they have a story, that they themselves are trying to come through the other side, just like you on a daily basis. And that the wonderful thing about homeless is it is a fixable problem. The 35,000 Canadians who are not in a home tonight can be, with your support, your compassion, and your understanding. So I hope next time you see a home shirt, or you see a homeless person, or you see an organization that's working to end homelessness, you know that together we can make a difference. And one day at a time, we can end homelessness in Canada. Thank you.
Okay, so that was our last one. I want to thank Corey, Seth, Stephanie, Lindsay, and Mariah for sharing their stories. It is a brave thing to do. We appreciate it very much. I feel we need brave people, and I'll paraphrase from Zeth's video actually. We need brave people to educate through their stories, to lessen the fear and lessen the hate. Now, I will ask Tara to introduce our keynote speaker today. I'm very excited that Nolan is here. I can't wait to hear Nolan's message. So Tara, I'll let you do the introduction. Thank you.
I am now very pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Nolan Pike. Nolan Pike is a writer and performer and has been an LGBTQ+ community educator for over 6 years. He has traveled internationally working with schools and other organizations to build more inclusive environments for the LGBTQ+ community. Nolan has conducted hundreds of workshops and worked with countless inspiring allies from diverse sectors, such as public and private schools, post-secondary institutions, businesses, hospitals, law enforcement, government, camps, shelters, women's centers, and other not-for-profit organizations. As a writer and comedian, Nolan believes in the power of storytelling to create change. The presentation will explore gender and how many of the ideas that we take for granted can impact the people around us in ways we might not expect.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here. Okay, so yes, that's me. Now I don't really have to introduce myself because that was such a great introduction. Thank you so much. I am a writer, although last year I made, I think, $12 doing that, so I have to have another job, and this is my other job. But luckily I love it a lot. So I do travel around and talk about how to make schools, businesses, you name it, safer for, it started sort of the LGBTQ community generally, more broadly, and in the last few years has really focused in on trans issues specifically, because that's where a lot of people have questions. Let me just get this turned on here for my PowerPoint. So I myself am trans. That's me there. That was taken the year that Nintendo came out, so in addition to being trans, I'm also getting old. So I'm trans, and what that means is when I was born, doctors declared with quite a lot of certainty that I was a girl, and that worked okay. It's starting to not work so good around the time of this photo for me. But I didn't figure out that I was trans until I was in my early 20s. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is, why it maybe took me so much time to figure it out as the presentation moves on. But I came out in my sort of early 20s and transitioned over the course of my 20s, and I'm 35 now. When I started doing this work, it was about 10 years ago. And what's interesting is that 10 years ago, when I came and talked to students, I was very often the very first trans person they were aware of having met. And sometimes it was the first time they were ever talking about trans issues. That's usually not the case today. Even when I go into an elementary school, kids aren't usually that surprised to meet a trans person. It's something that's more a part of their world now. And one of the reasons for that is that we're starting to tell more stories about trans people, and it's starting to not be quite so novel. It's amazing how quickly things can change from 10 years ago maybe being the first trans person that people were aware of meeting to today. Most of the schools I go to have out trans students in them, occasionally also even trans teachers. So things do change fast, particularly when we take action, like what everybody's doing here today. One of the other things that's changed, I think, pretty rapidly is the way we talk about discrimination and bullying. I went to high school in the 90s, and in the 90s, we used to just say, be nice to everybody because we're all the same. That's what we used to say. We used to be like, just ignore all the ways that people are different and just be nice to everybody because really we're all just the same deep down. And there's some truth to that. Of course, there's ways in which we're the same, but I think that talking about it that way, actually, we do ourselves a disservice because we aren't all the same. We're all people, and we all deserve respect. We all have things in common. We all have things to contribute, but we're also all different. We have different experiences, opinions, strengths, struggles, and those differences are so often what makes us beautiful. And they're why diversity is a good thing. It enriches our world. And in fact, there's even statistics that show that a company that has a very diverse staff is going to be more effective at problem solving, because the more diverse the staff is, the more experiences that staff is drawing from to solve problems, right? So diversity is not just a sort of beautiful, wonderful thing that we can enjoy. It also can be very, very practical. But when it comes to fighting bullying, which is something that we're more and more concerned with these days, it's important that we don't ignore the ways that we are different. Because as was said before, those differences are often the things that at times cause people to get picked on or singled out. For example, like being LGBT. So this is sort of my background and where I come from. When I was in high school, I was picked on a lot. I was still identifying as a girl at the time. I had a girlfriend, and that was something that sort of made me a bit of a target. And being LGBT is one of those things that might, cause somebody to be more likely to be picked on. The reason why I want to talk about this is because oftentimes, the ways that we tell our stories, it doesn't always look like this. It's not always in an auditorium. It's not always in a novel. We often just tell our stories through the way we live our lives and the way we interact with people and the words we use to describe ourselves. And I gotta say, in 10 years of doing this work, one of the most common questions that I've been asked is why anybody would use the word queer to describe themselves. Because, you know, as we all know, queer is a word that's been used to hurt people. It's been used as a slur. It's a word that's been used to bully people. And oftentimes people are confused as to why anybody would use it to describe themselves. But it really speaks to this idea of difference. You know, back in the 90s when the fight for gay rights was really picking up steam, and back then, you know, back before a lot of changes in legislation happened, you know, you could be fired if you were gay. There were all kinds of consequences, social consequences for being gay. And so people were fighting to try to have, you know, try to have equal rights, things like gay marriage. And one of the things that people used to always say is, I'm gay and I deserve the same rights as my straight neighbor because we are the same. Other than who we love, we're exactly the same. And around the time that this was getting said a lot, a whole bunch of other folks that were part of the LGBTQ community said, hey, hang on a second though, that's not really necessarily true. I'm not really exactly the same as my straight neighbor. We have lots of things in common, right? We're both people, we both deserve dignity and respect, but we're also very different. We've had very, very different lives, and those differences are beautiful and important. I deserve equal rights not because I am the same, but because I am a person. And in fact, I don't want to have to erase the things about me that are different in order to be treated with dignity. I want to be able to celebrate the things about me that are different. And that was around the time that people started to use the word queer, because it means different. And it's saying, hey, you're making fun of me because I'm different. Well, I'm going to take that same word and say to be different is actually a beautiful thing. It's a wonderful thing. Which isn't to say that the word still can't be used to hurt people, but, you know, it's all about context, right? The word gay can be used to hurt people too, depending on how we say it. Our tone of voice goes a very long way. And it's also very different to call somebody something than to have somebody say a word themselves, because that's them telling their own story. And I love this theme today. What's your story? Partially because I'm a writer and a storyteller, so it fits in pretty nicely. But mostly because I believe that all of us have an important story to tell, our own. I believe that when we tell our stories, the world really is transformed. And I speak from experience. When I was a kid, I had heard no stories about trans people at all. In fact, the only place that I was aware of having seen trans people was on like really trashy talk shows. That was it. And then eventually that got expanded a little bit to sometimes there would be like a really nasty character on Law & Order or CSI that was trans, and that was it. That was my whole picture of what it meant to be trans. And that made it very, very difficult for me to understand that I was trans, because I didn't have any stories that I could relate to. And it also meant that the whole world couldn't understand what it means to be trans, because they too had no stories through which to understand it. It was almost like we were looking at this diverse, beautiful, wonderful community of trans people through a very narrow lens. And when I look through this lens, at this room, for example, it looks like there's only 10 of you here. So if I wanted to understand what group of people came to this event and I was looking through this lens, I would only have those 10 faces to go on. I would only have those 10 stories to draw on. And the rest of you would be in total darkness to me. It's not that I want to ignore you, it's just that I literally have no choice. And that's how we were all looking at the trans community for years and years and years. Now that we're hearing more stories from trans people, we're starting to get a better picture of what it means to be trans. It's more possible for young trans people to come out because they've heard stories that reflect their life and they can go, oh yeah, that's how I feel. And then they in turn are able to tell their stories. And the more of these stories get told, the more clear this picture is of what it means to be trans. And this is true for all things, right? Not just trans people. The more stories we hear, the more we get a sense of who somebody really, really is, and it becomes harder to discriminate. But this storytelling is important even when it's not in an auditorium into a microphone, right? We tell stories in lots of different ways, through the words we use to describe ourselves, within our friend group, within our families, and all of these things are transformative as well. In fact, that's why the ability to come out is so important. You know, people used to always say, they still do sometimes, but they say it less and less, but it used to be so common to hear people say, so what if you're gay? So what if you're trans? What business is it of mine? I don't need to know that. Or why should you have to talk about that at work? Or why should you have to talk about that at school? What business is it of mine? But when we hold attitudes like that, it's true that LGBTQ folks tell their stories less. And when that happens, we never get to hear them, which means that then a gay 10-year-old or 15-year-old or even 30-year-old may have never heard a story that reflects their lives. And it's not just for them, it's for the rest of us too. We also haven't been given the opportunity to understand. And I really believe that the more stories we hear, the harder it is to hold on to our prejudices, because we replace all the bad misinformation that we got from trashy talk shows and CSI and Law & Order with the reality of people's lives. And it becomes that much easier to empathize with the real people that we've come to know. So telling our story is important because it unites us, it teaches us things about one another's experiences, which then can empower us to speak out when we see something happening that is wrong. And, you know, I think that very, very often we wonder, what difference can I really make? You know, if I step up and say something, what difference does it really make? I really believe that when we stand up, we make a bigger impact than we could possibly ever imagine. You know, I've been picked on my whole life. And I remember a few of the really bad moments of that, but most of it is all a blur. But I remember every single time anyone has ever stood up for me. Didn't happen that often, but it was very, very, very powerful when it did. And beyond that, I also remember the look on the faces of the people who were picking on me. And that was really worth it, let me tell you. But I want to talk about one time that somebody stood up for me that is really, really important to me. It was my niece Kaylee. It was before I was out as transgender. And I appeared a lot more ambiguous than I do now. So it was at a time in my life where 50% of the time people thought I was a woman, 50 people thought I was a man. And Kaylee still knew me as her aunt, at the time her Aunt Natasha. I was picking her up from Brownies, so she was however old you are when you're in Brownies, I don't know, pretty little. And I hadn't seen her in a while, and she was surprised when I walked into the gym. She was having her troop meeting, and she ran up all excited and gave me a big hug. And then two of the girls in her troop were curious about who I was, and they asked. And she said, "This is my Aunt Natasha." They both looked at me with a kind of horrified and disgusted look on their face. And they said, "He is your Aunt Natasha?" What happened next was really remarkable to me, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. Kaylee, tiny, stepped in between me and these girls, put her hands on her hips, and with no shortage of attitude said, "Yeah, he is my Aunt Natasha." They didn't say anything else. I was very, very touched by this. You know, Kaylee's instinct in that moment was to protect me, someone more than twice her age. This kid's guts were telling her that the situation had the potential to hurt my feelings, and her guts were right. She didn't know anything about gender identity. She didn't even know I was trans. She didn't know that what just happened has happened to me hundreds of times over the course of my life, and that it has hurt every single time. She didn't know any of that. Just something in her guts thought, those kids are being mean to somebody that I love, and I'm going to intervene. At that time in my life, that situation was a day-to-day reality for me. I couldn't go anywhere without people misreading or misunderstanding my gender, and it made navigating the world very, very painful. It made going into bathrooms impossible. It meant that most of the time when I met people, they would put out their hands while simultaneously making a kind of face like, what are you? And this hurt. It hurt a lot, and it gave me a lot of anxiety. And while these things have happened to me hundreds of times, it was only that one time with Kaylee that I ever remember anyone trying to protect me from it. And it made me very, very proud of my niece. Because at that moment, I knew that this kid was going to grow up to be somebody who looks out for people. And in fact, she has grown up to be somebody who looks out for people. I knew she was going to make the world a better place in those tiny little everyday acts, which, by the way, I think is the most important way to impact the world. It's through those tiny little things that we might think of as insignificant. They actually have a powerful ability to make the world a better place when we simply just take care of the people around us by practicing kindness and standing up for what we know is right. A couple of years ago, well, just recently, gender identity was added to the Nova Scotia to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and a few years before that, it was added to the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, and it was a big deal. And because of the work that I do, I wanted to go and speak on behalf of the bill and say why I thought it was really, really important. But a lot of people were there talking about statistics and unemployment and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought I would talk about something different. I didn't talk about that. I didn't talk about how, the bill would help reverse underemployment in the trans community, or how it would give trans people legal ammunition to fight discrimination, all of which is true and all of which is important. I spoke instead about the way that small shifts can create immeasurable change. As I said before, I didn't even hear the word transgender until I was in my early 20s. To my knowledge, I didn't know any transgender people. I hadn't had any transgender teachers or healthcare professionals, family members. There were no books or CDs by transgender artists. I still had CDs. By transgender artists. On my bookshelf, I knew nothing about the transgender athletes that represent this country or the transgender activists without whom I would not be standing here today. In fact, the only place, again, that I had seen trans people was through other people's stories, right? Not trans people telling their own stories, but other people telling their stories. And most of those stories were horribly inaccurate. Which led to my realization that I was trans being an incredibly painful and fearful one. When I realized that I was trans, I worried, will I find work? Will I lose family members? Will people lose respect for me? Will they think I'm a freak? Will anyone love me? And I know that my parents experienced similar concerns for me when I came out. As a society, we impose these concerns on trans people. We validate them in subtle and less subtle ways. What's really sad about this is that it gave me the impression that being trans was a horrible fate, when in fact, it has been a wonderful experience. I have faced discrimination, violence, sure, there have been some downsides, but overwhelmingly, it has been beautiful. It's given me a wonderful perspective on the world that I couldn't have had any other way. I have an empowering sense of community with other trans people, and I have developed such a strong sense of pride. I wouldn't change being transgender for the world, and I wish so much that I could go back and tell my younger self that. I wish somebody had said to me, "This is a wonderful thing that you are." Including trans people in our human rights legislation in this country increases the likelihood that young trans people will look around and see themselves reflected in diverse ways, and will have more opportunities to imagine rich and fulfilling futures. And I cannot overestimate the importance of this, because being able to imagine those futures is a vital step in being able to achieve them. So that's what I said when I talked at Province House. But here's the thing, I'm not trying to convince any of you to change the law or create new policy. And it's a good thing. Because I believe that more influential than policy, more impactful than any piece of paper, are the things that we all do when we stand up for each other and when we stand up for ourselves. The great privilege of my job is getting to meet youth far braver than I, youth who stand up and say, "This is who I am, and this is what I need to feel safe. This is what I need to be able to go to school here, to live in this house, to work at this job. I need you to call me by my name. I need the right to wear clothes that express who I am. I need a safe place to use the washroom. I need to be allowed to be open and honest about who I am. I need to be able to tell my story, to fully participate in this community that we are all building." None of these things are easy to ask for, ever. In fact, in the past, more often than not, I have not been brave enough to ask for them for myself. But I meet youth every day who fight discrimination by standing up for themselves and by standing up for each other. They are some of the bravest people that I know. They're an inspiration to me and make me believe that our fight against discrimination continues to march forward even when there is no end in sight. Which brings us to that word ally. We hear that a lot in relation to these pillars that we've been talking about today. A friend of mine once said to me, and I really took it to heart, that being an ally against discrimination, against racism and ableism, classism, homophobia, sexism, all of these things, being an ally against these things is not about who you are. It's not about what you believe. It's not about what you've learned. Being an ally against discrimination is a practice. It's about what you do every day. So, I've talked about a few things that we can do to fight discrimination and be good allies. We can stand up for ourselves, we can stand up for each other, we can tell our stories, and we can listen to the stories of others. But I do think that there's something else important that we need to do. We need to celebrate, all of us. Everyone who is marginalized because they are in some way different, we need to celebrate that difference. We need to celebrate how it enriches our world. We need to tell ourselves and the world, this is a wonderful thing that we are. When we do that, the world truly is a changed place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nolan, for the wonderful talk. We are very appreciative that you were able to be a part of our Stand Up, Speak Out event, and I know you gave us all lots to think about. Thank you. We would also like to take this time to thank a number of community partners that helped us with this event. Bill Skirman, Town of Amherst, Geraldine McDonald, Town of New Glasgow, Christopher Firth, Crombie Property Management, Ron Smith, Masstown Market, Ashley Sims, Town of Truro, Jacqueline Johnson, Truro Mall, and Greg Chisholm, Nova Scotia Department of Transportation and Infrastructural Renewal.
Also, before we end our event, I'd like to acknowledge our live art piece down here in the corner. Serena, Marina, Anna, Lincoln, and Riley, it's looking great. Thank you so much for giving us your artistic gift today. I understand that this will be on display in the front foyer of CEC, so we can all appreciate it. Mr. Callback?
Thanks, Tara and Bailey. I think at this time, we talk a lot at CEC when in the opening days and that we talk about respect, and this was a great audience. It was a great event, so let's give everyone a round of applause and thank you. I want to thank everyone for coming and making this such a successful event. I know it was a lot of work. Just some reminders to our students. Students at CEC, the vendors will be in the front foyer during lunchtime. So please, if you have a chance, stop in and visit those vendors. They were gracious enough to come. Also encourage to visit hashtag #SUSOCCRSB to share your stories on Instagram and to follow submitted stories. At this time, I'd ask our grade 9s if they could exit through the bottom doors to your right, my left, and head on your buses. You can head back. And to our grade 10s, thank you so much. Lunchtime. Thanks, everyone.